thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, called for songs of loudest praise.
Good to go? All right. Well, welcome to Wednesday night service at the Milton Church of Christ. I've obviously moved to a much better studio. My call screener and producer, Rob, is here. And so we're glad that you have joined us. Hope you've had a great week and appreciate you joining us. We're starting right on time, which is wonderful. We'll let some folks join. But we do have, if you want to text me, you can. If you want to do a chat, Rob will see that and be able to share that with me. But also tonight, if you want to have a discussion, if you will call in, you can call in, and actually we'll be able to put it where everybody in the group can hear you. Okay, yeah. If you have, we're not going to give out. Well, I'll give you my number. It's BR549. BR549 for those of you of Hee Haw fans. But if you have Rob's number or my number, feel free to call us, and we'll actually be able to hear you, and it will go out over the broadcast, and so we can have a discussion. So I hope that you'll do that, and I'll probably share that a little more as we go through as some other folks will join us. But feel free to call us as we're coming to you live from our new studio. So we're talking about a divided kingdom. We talked last week that the kingdom was at least part of the kingdom, Israel divided off to the north, and only Judah and the tribe of Benjamin in the south become the nation of Judah and maintain in Jerusalem, and that is where, because of David's faithfulness, that God maintains one of David's descendants on the throne. So what then happens in this divided period of time? Well, what we find is the vast majority of the kings are idol worshipers, and they lead the people astray, and we will see that happen. And one king is worse than the one before him, than his father was, and then there'll arise a king who actually returns the people back to God, and that seems to be very short-lived. And part of the reason we're going to see that Jeroboam becomes king over the northern kingdom, and that was God's plan. And Rehoboam tried to stop that. Solomon tried to stop that. But it was God's plan for Jeroboam to take that kingdom. In fact, remember, the prophet would come and tear the garment into 12 pieces and give 10 of them to Jeroboam, because he says, I am tearing the kingdom away from Solomon's descendants because of Solomon's disobedience and Solomon leaving me. So we have this new kingdom. But now Jeroboam, and I think it's just human nature, not realizing that if God gave him the kingdom, that God would secure his place in the kingdom. Immediately Jeroboam begins to think, if I let these people go back to Jerusalem to worship, back to the temple, then the chances are they're going to leave me, that they're going to go there, and there might be a rebellion. They might decide to again reunite with Judah. So he sets up a couple of cities. He creates high places. He actually creates altars for them to worship outside of Jerusalem. And so that begins the problem, or continues this problem of them not worshiping God faithfully, and it will cause a problem for Israel now through their history, as they have moved away from God, and then they have removed themselves from the protection and the blessings and the prosperity that God has given them. So we're seeing that happen. If you want to go back and read, we're going to be in 1 Kings 17, I believe, tonight. But if you want to go back and read, there's just a couple chapters, 3 or 4 from where we were last week, but you begin to pretty quickly get a flavor. Something else I want to talk about quickly as we kind of begin our lesson. And for those of you who are joining us, thanks for joining us. If you want to you can text a message to my phone or to Rob's phone, or if you will call in, you'll actually be able to ask a question and be a part of that discussion. And, man, we'd love for you to do that tonight if you are so inclined. We are greatly influenced in our culture by the era of reason. The formation of our government was very impacted by the Enlightenment and by reason, and it has really infiltrated the faith. It's infiltrated the church. Not that faith is unreasonable, but this need to verify and to explain and to almost by scientific method explain everything. And so what we'll find is there are a great number of individuals who would then deny the miraculous power of God, or certainly the miraculous power in the individuals and the events that we see in our scripture. And we'll say, well, that was the way they understood it because they didn't have the knowledge we have. They were superstitious, whatever that excuse might be. And so this really wasn't miraculous. This was just coincidence, or however you might want to explain that away. But man, that we lose the power of God when we lose the power of miracles. And then we see that when we come to the New Testament, what's the real difficulty that they have? It's resurrection. It's, can God raise people from the dead? Could God raise Jesus? Can God raise his followers from the dead? Just the question, as we talked about Sunday morning, for those of you who could be with us, about that what's easier to say, your sins are forgiven, or arise and walk. And so this ability of God to do miraculous things is so important, because the scripture teaches us of a physical bodily resurrection. And so we see that God is able to do those things that seem beyond the ability to do, because God is miraculous. So when we study the scripture, I want us never to explain away God's miraculous power, God's intervention in the lives of people. And God, who created everything, who designed it and created it and controlled it, for him to be able to perform miracles is really not a great stretch for us. But if we lose that, if we explain that away, if we deny that in our theology, then I think it opens us up for lots of problems in the future. I want to begin reading in 1 Kings 17. Let's read the first 4 verses together. We're going to be introduced to the great prophet Elijah, who maybe is the greatest of all of the prophets, and we will see Elijah in the New Testament. We'll see him referred to. Certainly John the Baptist is one like Elijah, but we'll see Elijah at the Mount of Transfiguration along with Jesus in the New Testament. Now Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, "As the Lord the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word." And the word of the Lord came to him, "Depart from here and turn eastward and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. You shall drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there." Now, guess who's king at this point as Elijah is prophet in Israel? It is King Ahab. And Ahab and his lovely wife Jezebel are really synonymous with evil and disobedience, and even their names just bring up those visions. As we've shared before, how many young girls do you know named Jezebel? Just not a name we name our children. And so Elijah has this confrontation with Ahab, as Ahab has certainly led Israel astray. And so there's going to be this famine. It's going to last for 3.5 years. And it's interesting, not only is it not going to rain, there's going to be no dew. There's going to be no moisture. And We in Middle Tennessee, for the second day of September, it's rare that you'll ever see it as green as it is here, and has been all through August and now September, and we've had these rains, and imagine going 3.5 years with no rain. And what makes this even more significant is that Jezebel and Ahab had begun the worship of Baal. And Baal is a god who is known for supplying fertility and rain and prosperity in one's crops. So we're familiar with the story of Elijah, or hopefully you're familiar with the story of Elijah. We'll talk about it more, but we'll talk about it for just a moment. And the prophets of Baal, where he calls down fire. But this is a confrontation between God and Baal, in that you're worshiping this god Baal, who hopefully is going to bring you prosperity and fertility and abundant crops. And yet he can't even provide you this rain, but the God of heaven can stop the rain and can provide the rain. And so we see that there's a lot going on here because this drought actually is in direct contradiction to why they would even worship Baal to begin with. And it also is a fulfillment of what God tells Israel all the way back in Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy, God says, when you enter this land that flows with milk and honey, and you worship idols, and you're disobedient to me, he said, I will dry up the land. I'll dry up the rains and remove this prosperity, this fertility that this land offers. And that's what Israel's done. And God, as he always is, keeps his promises. And so he had promised to bless them, that if they would walk with him, that he would lead them in this land that flowed with milk and honey, and that they would live in houses they hadn't built, and their vineyards and all of those things. They would have protection, but they have left God, and now they're paying the consequences for that. So it's important that we realize this conflict that's going on, and now Israel is paying for its disobedience to God. But God is going to take care of Elijah. But we're going to see that there's something else I kind of want to mention here as we move into this. The rain is going to come and the rain is going to go on Elijah's prayers. That obviously it's God that causes this, but it's Elijah's is able to pray to God, and God causes this drought, and then God opens up for the rain to come. And this really adds a great deal of power to what James tells us in the New Testament, in the book of James, where James says that the fervent prayer of a righteous man is powerful and effective. And I think for many of us, we struggle to say, well, does God answer prayer today like he did at the time of Elijah? And we know that he had sent Elijah for this purpose, and this was God's, I think, special purpose. But I think way too often, and part of it is our need for explanation, our need for reasoning, that we discount the power of God, and we discount the power of prayer to access the throne of God and his power. And we see that Elijah was able to do powerful things. And James will even make reference to Elijah in the book he writes, the New Testament. So this is not lost. It's not a stretch to go to James and say, well, those are totally unequal, because James will even make reference to Elijah and what he did. And as Christians, I think we are way too reluctant to go to prayer. We're way too shy. I think the word might be timid. We may be way too timid when we go to God in prayer for what prayer can actually do. It's important that we be folks of prayer and realize that this is a powerful thing, that God listens to his people, and when we come to him in honest, obedient, humble, unselfish faith, that God answers our prayers and does so in very powerful ways. And as we live in a time which is certainly in some ways different, but some ways very similar to what Elijah was living in. what are those similarities? Well, we're not going to worship, for the most of us, an image, but we may worship an ideology. We may worship our abilities as a culture, our government, our intellect, our technology, those things we would be dependent on, and that would draw us away from depending on God. Just like they were dependent on Baal to protect them and to give them prosperity, and they didn't trust in God, and it's important that we're drawn back to God. And I think that's what Elijah's about, and that's what we ought to be about as well. In our lesson, the author quotes from Billy Graham. I think it's a wonderful quote, and I want to read that. We can be certain that God will give us the strength and resources we need to live through any situation in life that he ordains. The will of God will never take us where the grace of God cannot sustain us. The will of God will never take us where the grace of God cannot sustain us. Man, what a powerful statement that is, that God will never allow us to be in a place, put us in a place where he can't be there to take care of us, take care of our needs, protect us, and bless us. We sometimes say God will never put more on us than we can bear, but I think what this comment is that whatever circumstances we find ourselves in, God will give us the strength to prosper through that, or at least survive to endure that. So what does that mean? How does that have to do with Elijah? What happens with Elijah? Well, Elijah is not immune from the effects of the drought. Elijah is not immune from the effects of the drought. The reason I share that with us is that as Christians, as God's people, we are not immune from the problems within our society, within our world. We're not immune from sin and its effects. Now, we're immune from the cost of sin, that's death. But the struggles, the curse that this world is under, we're not immune from that. Now, does God assist us in that? I absolutely believe that he does. But we're not immune from the struggles, and neither was Elijah. The drought affected Elijah. So he goes to a canyon, to a valley, and drinks from a stream, and the ravens, the blackbirds, bring him bread and meat to eat in the morning and in the evening. It's really not unlike what we see happening to Israel in the wilderness wandering, is it? But the birds bring food for Elijah, and he drinks from that stream because the drought has caused a severe problem. But God takes care of him through that situation. Even though it's difficult, God blesses him, but it is difficult. And here's something that makes it probably difficult mentally and emotionally for Elijah. He's better off than some of the other prophets of God who are being persecuted by Ahab and Jezebel, and many more would have been killed had it not been for Obadiah, who took 100 of the prophets of God and hid them in 2 caves, 50 each. But what we find is that the prophets of Baal were eating from the table of Ahab and Jezebel. So they were probably eating much better. Does that sometimes cause us a frustration when it looks like those who are doing evil, at least temporarily, are prospering more? Sometimes that's a hard concept to overcome. But God was taking care of Elijah, and God will take care of us. But there are often struggles, and sometimes it seems like those who are doing evil, at least in the short run, may have it more comfortable. And that may appear to be the case and may even be the case. But we know that God takes care of us in the long run. So God takes care of Elijah, but what happens? The stream runs dry. After a period of time, not the full 3.5 years, the stream runs dry. And so Elijah has to go somewhere else to find water. And so he goes to the city of Zarephath, which is not in Israel. It's not a city among the Israelites. But he goes to Zarephath, and he sits there in the city, and he runs into a widow at Zarephath who has a son. And he asks her to bring him some water, to draw him water, or to bring him water, and she agrees to do that. And he says, bring me a hoe cake, maybe, in our terms, something like that, some bread that I may eat. And the woman's gathering some sticks, and here's her comment. She says, "Sir, I don't have any bread." She said, "I have a little flour, I have a little meal, and I have a little oil. And I'm gathering these sticks to build a little fire, and I'm going to go home, and I'm going to take the last of my flour and the last of my oil, and I'm going to make a couple of little hoe cakes for myself and my son, and we're going to eat those, and then we will just resign ourselves to starving to death." Oh, this is really a sad story to me as you read it. What this famine was causing. People had been disobedient to God, and now they were suffering that. It didn't bring them the prosperity that they thought it would. In fact, as Satan's lies always do, they always bring pain, never the promise of better things. And so he says, "Well, bring me that, and the Lord will make sure that your meal or your flour and your oil doesn't run out." And so she does. She's willing to do that, and sure enough, for many days, she and her son and Elijah and her household are able to eat. And he says this will last until this famine is over, until it begins to rain again and the crops produce. I've shared this with you before, but this is important to me. She never has lots of oil. She never has lots of meal, but it never runs out. For most of us, we like to kind of have some reserve. We kind of like to know, yeah, there's milk in the refrigerator, and there's frozen pizzas in the freezer, or whatever that is to eat. But she was dependent every day on God. It was the same lesson that Israel had to learn in the wilderness wanderings about depending on God. And so each day she had to depend, every time she went to make a meal, that there was going to be food there, and that she was dependent on God to provide it. Because there was nowhere else to go. It wasn't just a lack of money. There was nowhere to go. There was no food to be had because of the famine. It's really hard to be that dependent on God. But I think it's important for us as Christians, as we grow in faith, to learn to depend each day on God. And that's how Jesus teaches us to pray. He teaches us to pray by saying, "God, Father, give us each day our daily bread. Give us today what we need today." And it's hard for me not to want to know about tomorrow and next year and 10 years from now or 20 years from now or whatever that might be. But learning to depend each day on God. And Jesus says, why do you worry? Why do you worry about the future? Just take care of each day, because each day has enough trouble of its own. And if we would learn to each day deal with the opportunities and the situations that we have to deal with each day, and let God help us with that, and then trust in Him, it would sure make life more pleasant. But that is a hard lesson. But the widow Zarephath began to learn that lesson, because each day she had depended on God, and God provided for her and for her family. Now, this is interesting, and the New Testament will actually talk about this story. It's interesting. Elijah is just such an important character, and these events are so important. This widow from Zarephath is not among the people of Israel, but Elijah goes to her, and she believes, and she's able to give him food to eat and listen to what he said. And even though she knew who the Lord was, but probably was not a worshiper of God, but she trusted. And Jesus would say, were there not any widows in Israel in the time of Elijah? But he went to this woman in Zarephath. So it's important that we learn to trust in God, and that our faith in God moves us to action. Because the people in Israel thought, well, because we're Israelites, because we're Jews, that automatically gives us relationship. And sometimes as Christians, we can become complacent, and that our faith is not as active or as important, isn't growing like it should. But we learn from this woman that God is always looking to those who are seeking Him, and that those who hunger for righteousness will be filled. So we should always be seeking after God and finding ways to be obedient to Him, because that's what God calls from us. But God also is a God who reaches out to all peoples and all nations. Now, something happens to the widow, and it's really kind of a sad thing that happens for her, in that she had gotten through this famine, was working through that. She was trusting in God, and then her son, her only son, becomes ill and continues to decline until he stops breathing. And so she reaches out, I think probably fusses at Elijah, complains to Elijah and fusses at him. And again, here's a woman of faith, but she's in great distress. And she said, why'd you come here? Did you just come here to point out my sins and then take my son? And Elijah seems really moved by that. And so he cries out to the Lord and he prays to the Lord, and he spreads himself out on the boy 3 times. The scripture says he took him into the room where he stayed. He's living with this woman, and life returns to this young boy, and he returns him to his mother. And she says, and this is verse 24 of 1 Kings 17, and the woman said to Elijah, now I know you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord is in your mouth, and the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth. It's interesting how her faith strengthened even more, that having that food, which had to move her toward a faith in God, and she had to have belief that she would even give up her last meal for this man of God. But this solidifies for her truly that this man was a man from God. I think we see that really true in our faith in Jesus, because what does Jesus say? Jesus comes and he teaches us what all truth is. Jesus was the great teacher. He is God in the flesh. He is living perfect righteousness, holiness. Jesus is how God lives among men. So his life and his teaching is perfect. And he did miracles that gave validity to what he was teaching. That, those eyewitnesses saw that this man truly is from God, or he couldn't do the things that he's done. But what was that crowning thing? That thing that Jesus did, he gave his life as a payment. What did God do through Jesus? He overcame sin and death. Jesus was raised from the dead. And that certainly strengthens our faith in him. And that's why, as we've been studying in the book of Acts, that was such a struggle. What do you mean, overcame death? That he brought resurrection from the dead. It's like death is that great final thing, and it had been. It was Satan's power over all of us was death. And God overcame the power of death, and that was a great struggle. But that's a great part of our faith. And we see Elijah. He taught, he did miracles through God, and God worked through him even to bring this young man back from the dead. But in the greatest way, Jesus was resurrected from the dead, the first fruits of all of us who will be raised. As we study about Elijah, hopefully it will strengthen our faith. It will teach us how important it is to be obedient to God, because God promises that when we follow him and we seek him, that he blesses us. But when we pull away from him and when we deny him and when we're disobedient, there are consequences to that. And also, we learn that God seeks us and that God has great power to care for us and all the problems that we might face each day, and in all the struggles of our society and the riots and the violence and the wars and all the problems, that God will watch over us and protect us. We're not immune from what happens. We're not immune. It may cause us pain and discomfort, but know that God will take care of us, and that God has raised Jesus from the dead, and that he'll raise each one of us in that last day. Do we need to respond? Are we still on? No, they just saying good job. Okay. We can.
We'll give you about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And then I'll play some music or something.
Okay. We'll tell them that if they want to call or come in. I reckon anybody's still there.
Oh, yeah.
We're
We got
still-
14 people on here.
All right.
14 people on here. 28
Good.
people.
All right, let's go. Are we still on?
Yeah. You're
Oh,
still on.
all right. We're here. If you want to call, we've gotten several comments. I'm going to make some more comments based on some of those. But if you want to call Rob's phone or my phone, if you've got a comment, I'd love to see how that works. You've been texting in. We'll take for a minute if you want to call in. But I do think the parallel. We're living in a time when people are anxious. I think we're anxious about elections, but really much more than that. We're anxious about direction. The anxiety, the anxiousness has almost made us all on edge. I think the virus hasn't helped that because it's changed our lifestyle, but it's hard to find rest. We're not sure where the stability is. We're not sure what to lash out at, I think is a fair statement, or whether or not to lash out, and not sure what's too far. On either way, I think we're pretty certain some things are too far, but we're not sure about that. And I think this lesson pulls back to tell us that when people move away from God, that there are consequences to that. And I think we probably are seeing that. I think there's no probably. We're seeing that in the world we live in today. In the world that we live in today, that more people have really moved away from God, and there are consequences. But I hope what we see in this is God does not forsake his own. Now, while Elijah had to suffer, and so did the other prophets, and so did people who were faithful, had to suffer through this, God did not forsake them, that God cared for them, and that God will not forsake us as we walk in his ways, and God will bless us. And hopefully we can find peace in that and trusting in God. And I would hope that all of us would find time to pray. It's easy to think that, well, prayer is kind of the last word. I want to do something that's more tangible, if you will. But I don't think there's anything in this world we can do that's more powerful than prayer. I think when in sincerity and honesty and earnestness and humility and unselfishness we go before God, I don't think there's anything more powerful that we can do than that. And I don't want us to lose that in this thought that, well, that just has to do with spiritual things. Because what we find is we see Elijah and we read through these stories, God is not only involved in spiritual things, but he's actually involved in the political and the physical things going on with his people. That God is not a God removed from our everyday lives. And God is not unconcerned about our everyday lives, and that we can find a real peace, hopefully, by trusting in him, knowing that he will bless us and take care of us. I'm glad that you've joined us. But if you want to call in, please, somebody might want to just call in to show everybody that it works. Who's brave out there and wants to give us a call? Rob, do you have any messages? I'm actually putting on my microphone. I feel like we ought to be, I feel like Bill Cody in the morning. We're on Circle TV. Thanks for joining us. Hello. Thank you. Hey, welcome aboard, caller.
Hey, buddy.
How are you doing, Josh?
Just work.
Glad that you've called in to join us. Hey, I think Rob said he called you. You're actually on our live stream, big boy.
All right.
So don't say anything you don't want to.
I used to call into the old CMT when I was a kid. So I feel like it's a lot like that.
No, that's it. At least it's not like what comes on WGNS late at night, coast to coast. We're not going to talk about UFOs and that type of thing. But anyway, we've got Rob has set us up so people can call in and be a part of our discussion. So I hope you're having a safe night and take care.
All right, bud. Y'all be careful. I'm getting ready to come past exit 32 here, and my phone drops.
All right, good deal. Good excuse. Good excuse. All right. Well, if nobody else is going to call and discuss, thanks for joining us. Look forward to hopefully seeing everybody on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. Hope that you can join us. If you can't join us in person, then we hope that you would join us on our broadcast at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. Have a great evening.